Hey guys, what's up? It's Eric with Advanced Level Automotive. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're here checking out this work van. It's a 2007 Chevy Express van 2500 and it's got the 4.8 liter V8 engine. Customer complaint is that the vehicle is a no crank, no start. Now this is a company vehicle, and the backstory to this one is that they initially lost the key a few months ago, and I guess they had other vans that they used, so this one kind of just sat for a few months. They finally had somebody come and make the key, and when they tried to start it up, it didn't want to start. So anyways, you guys know how we do it. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so taking you guys over to the vehicle. Now the first thing that I noticed is that the battery was completely dead. So I've got my jump pack on here. Let me take you guys inside and show you what it's doing. All right, so I've got the key in my hand here, and I'm gonna go ahead and stick it into the ignition, turn the ignition on. As you guys can see, everything powers up. And the first thing I like to look for is always going to be a check engine light on the instrument cluster. You guys can see the check engine light is illuminated. Now I'm going to go ahead and attempt to crank this thing. And you guys are going to see that it does not want to crank at all. So here we go. Try that one more time. Now I will say that whenever I cycle the key like this, I can hear the fuel pump priming. So we definitely know that it's getting fuel up to the engine. Again, I'm going to go ahead and attempt to crank it. And we got nothing. Now the other thing that I like to look for is some type of security or anti-theft warning. As you guys can see, we don't have any of that. And on top of that, this key is actually just a regular key. It doesn't have any type of chip on it. So I don't think this van has any type of security system. So I know what a lot of you guys are thinking, and I'm kind of thinking the same thing. We might have a bad starter. I mean, it makes sense. The truck has been sitting for a while. You know, we might even be able to get up underneath the truck and maybe tap the starter with the wrench or something, see if we can get this thing to turn over. But of course, before we decide to call the customer and tell them that we need to replace a starter, we need to do our proper diagnosis first. We need to make sure that we don't have a problem with a bad relay or a bad fuse, a bad computer, or maybe even bad wiring. Now, as far as what our next step should be, I mean, there's a lot of different places we can start. But what I want to do first is I want to go ahead and take a quick look at the starter relay. All right, guys, so taking a quick look under the hood, let me show you guys where the fuse box is located and the starter relay. Now, the first thing I noticed when I saw this relay or fuse box is that it didn't have a lid on it. And as you can tell, that's definitely not a good thing, because it's pretty obvious that we had some type of water intrusion going on here, because we seem to have quite a bit of corrosion going on here. Now, I don't know if this is going to affect the function of the starting system, but I mean, it is a possibility. Anyway, I've already gone ahead and located the starter relay. It's this one right here. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to pull it out. Sometimes these things can be pretty difficult to get out. There we go. Man, take a look at that. We got some corrosion going on here. Looks like we've got some oxidation from possible water intrusion. Now again, I'm not sure if this is affecting the starting system, but you guys could imagine that, you know, it's possible that we have maybe a contact issue or something from this corrosion, and that's what's causing our problem in the starting circuit. Let's take a quick look inside of the fuse box where the relay was located. You guys can see we have a little bit of corrosion, not too much. So I'm not really sure what to think, but I guess what I want to do first is to start by putting in a relay jumper and seeing if we can test the circuit from here. Okay guys, so what I have here is my relay tester kit. Now, you've probably seen me use this in plenty of other videos that I have. If you guys are looking for a kit like this, you can find a link in the description to where you can purchase this. So we've got the relay here, and I've already found the adapter. It's going to be this green one. You guys can see it's a 4-pin adapter. So we're going to go ahead and stick this into the slot, and this is going to give us a central point from where we can test the entire circuit. Okay guys, so before we go any further, I want to take a quick moment to go over the wiring diagram with you, just so that you can understand what it is I'm looking for when I do my pinpoint checking. So what we're looking at here is going to be the wiring diagram for the starting circuit. It's actually pretty simple to follow. So let's go ahead and start by identifying the components. Right up here, you'll find the starter relay, this box right here. And then if you look at this dotted line, the outer box represents the underhood fuse box. If you look down here, you'll see this is a starter motor. Down here, this is the powertrain control module. Over here, we have the park neutral safety switch. Here we have the fuse box again. And then right over here, we have the ignition switch. So what I want to do is I want to focus on the starter relay, because this really is the central point in which we can test the entire system. Now, if you guys understand how relays work, you'll know that the relays have two sides. One side is going to be the control side, and the other side is going to be the load side or the switching side. Now, with your typical 4-pin relay, you're going to have two powers, one power for the switching side and one power for the control side. So what I want to do is backtrace these through the wiring diagram and figure out where they come from. Starting here on the load side, I'm going to highlight this And then we're going to zoom in. As you guys can see, this pin here at the relay gets its power from this ignition A fuse number 49, which is a 40 amp fuse. And if we highlight this red wire, you can see that it comes from the positive battery terminal. So right here is the battery, and you can see right here it says positive. That's the positive battery terminal. So that is going to be a direct power from the battery. So that means whenever we go to this relay and check the power here, this is going to be a power at all times. It doesn't matter whether the ignition is on or off. Now moving over to the control side, I'm going to highlight this here. We're going to follow it out, and you guys can see it comes out on this dark green wire. Then it goes to the park neutral safety switch. Now if you guys take a look inside of the park neutral safety switch, you can see that depending on what position the switch is in, it's either going to allow the current to flow or not. And if you look at the way this diagram is drawn up, you can see that it's either in the park position or the neutral position, which is allowing the current to flow. So we're going to follow this back out, and you can see this pink wire. We're going to highlight it, and if you follow it over, you can see that it goes back to the underhood fuse box, and it goes through this engine fuse number 1, which is fuse number 23, and it is a 15 amp fuse. So I'm going to highlight the output here, and we're going to follow it up, and you can see that it comes from the ignition switch. Now if you look inside the ignition switch, you can see that in order for there to be current flow through this pink wire, the ignition switch has to be in the run or the start position. When the ignition switch is in the run or the start position, that's going to close the switch here and allow the current flow to come through this red wire here. And if we follow it up, you can see that it comes from this ignition B fuse number 52, which is a 40 amp fuse. And if you follow it up here on the diagram, it says that it's hot at all times. Now, even though the source here is a power all the time, you have to understand that that power will not get to the control side of this relay until the ignition switch is in the run or the start position, and the neutral safety switch is in either the park or the neutral position. So now that we understand where the power source for these two pins come from, we can focus on these two pins down here. We'll start with the control side. I'm going to highlight the output here. You can see it's a yellow and black wire, and if we follow it down, you'll see that it goes directly to the PCM. And the way this works is whenever the PCM wants to engage the starter, it's going to ground this circuit. When it grounds the circuit, if we follow this back up here, that's going to energize the coil winding inside of this relay. It is going to magnetize, which is going to close the switch here, and that's going to allow power to flow from this fuse 49 through this purple wire. Now if we follow this purple wire down, you'll see that it goes directly to the starter solenoid. Now if you look at the starter solenoid, you'll see that inside of the solenoid we have magnetic coil windings as well, and you can see that it actually grounds to itself. So as soon as we send a power into the solenoid, that's going to energize these coil windings, that's going to magnetize this, which in turn is going to close the switch on this side. When this switch closes, that's going to allow power to come from this black wire, which if we follow it back up here, you'll see that it comes directly from the battery positive. So power from the battery positive is going to flow through this black wire and directly to the starter motor. And as you can see here, the starter motor actually grounds to itself. So if you guys ever take a look at the back of a starter motor, you'll see that you have two main connections. One of them is going to be for the starter solenoid. This is going to be a thinner, low current wire. And then you'll have this bigger battery cable, which is going to be the main power feed that feeds the starter motor. So now that we understand how the system works, we can move back over to the vehicle and do all of our diagnostic checks at the starter relay. Again, we're going to be looking for our two power feeds, one for the switching side, which is going to be a power at all times. The other power here at the control side, which is going to be a power only when the ignition switch is on, and the neutral safety switch is in either the park or the neutral position. Then we can come down here to this pin and we can check to see if our computer is actually grounding the circuit and trying to engage the starter. Then finally we can move over to this pin here and check our output from the relay that goes to the starter solenoid. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move back to the vehicle. So I'm going to go ahead and stick it into the slot here. There we go. So I've got my power probe here. It is connected to the battery, as you guys can see. And what we're going to do is we're going to touch this relay and we're going to try to figure out which pin is for what. Now, according to the wiring diagram, we should have two powers, one for the control side and one for the switching side. But the important thing to note is that the power for the switching side is going to be a power at all times. So even with the key out of the ignition, we should have power on one of those pins. And as far as the power for the control side, well, that power is only going to show up with the ignition in the run or the start position. So as of right now, the key is not in the ignition. So we should only have one power source. So I'm going to go ahead and try to locate that one by touching each of these pins. So I'm going to start by touching this pin. You can see we have nothing there. I'm going to touch the pin next to it. You guys can see we're showing a ground on that one. I'm going to touch the pin down here. You can see I got nothing there, 0 volts. Now I'm going to touch this last pin down here at the bottom. And you can see we have our battery power feed on this pin down here. So what I want to do next is I want to go ahead and stick the key into the ignition and turn it to the run position. So I've got the key right here. I'm going to go ahead and stick it into the ignition and turn it on. Now we can move back to the relay and try to identify which pin is our other power. Let's see here. We'll start by touching this pin. And you guys can see we have our battery power on this pin. Let me go ahead and check the other ones. See, we got nothing there. And I'll touch the other one here. And you can see we have a ground here. So it looks like we have our 2 powers. This one down here is going to be our main battery power feed, which is a power all the time. And then this one up here is going to be our ignition power feed, which is a power whenever we turn the ignition on. Now, the other really important thing that this tells us is that the neutral safety switch is not a problem, because in fact, if you take a look at the wiring diagram, you'll see that this ignition power source has to travel through the neutral safety switch in order to reach this pin here. So just the fact that we have power on this pin here tells us that we don't have a problem with the neutral safety switch. Next up, we're going to try to identify the other 2 pins. One pin should be the control for the engine computer, and the other one should be the pin that goes directly to the starter solenoid. Now, just by touching these 2 pins, I already have a pretty good idea of which one is which, because if you guys notice that when I touch this pin up here, you'll see that we have 0 volts, but when I touch this pin down here, we have a ground. Now, the reason we're showing a ground is because this power probe is finding a ground through the starter solenoid. Now, the other quick way that we can prove that this pin up here is for the computer control is by sticking the relay in. When we stick the relay into the top of this adapter, the power should flow through the control side of the relay from this pin here, which is our ignition power feed, and it should come out on this other side of the control side that goes to the computer. Again, as you can see, this pin over here does not have any power, but watch what happens whenever we stick the relay in there. Here we go. I'm going to go ahead and stick the relay into the top. Now, as long as we don't have a problem with the control side of the relay, we should have power on this pin here. As you guys can see, that's exactly what we're showing. So we know for a fact now that this pin right here is the control wire that goes to the engine computer. And whenever the engine computer wants to crank this starter, it's going to ground this pin here. When it grounds this pin here, that's going to energize the relay, and it's going to send a power output on this pin over here. Again, you guys can see this pin is a ground at the moment because it's finding its path to ground through the starter solenoid. So what I want to do real quick is I want to take this little wire with this terminal end that came inside of the kit, and I want to attach it to the control side of the relay like so. And then we're going to take the tip of the power probe and stick it into this end. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and connect the 2. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move inside the vehicle, and I'm going to attempt to crank the engine over, and what you should see is that this turns into a ground. Now the nice thing about this power probe, and I know it might sound annoying on the camera, is this beeping noise, but what's convenient about it is that the beeping noise actually changes tone whenever it detects a ground. This is helpful because when I'm inside the vehicle cranking it, I can't actually see the meter on the power probe, but I can hear the tone change. So I just went ahead and set the camera down. I'm going to go ahead and move inside the vehicle and crank this thing over. Okay guys, so I didn't even have to see it. I could hear the tone change. So we know for a fact that the engine computer is trying to ground this relay. But what we need to figure out is whether or not we have an output from this relay going to the starter solenoid. So as you guys can see, I switched the lead over to this pin right here, which is the output that goes to the starter solenoid. Now I'm going to go ahead and stick the tip of the power probe into here. Okay, as you guys can see, I have the power probe connected to the lead here. Now I'm pretty much going to go ahead and do the same thing. I'm going to attempt to crank the engine over, and what you should see is that this switches from a ground to a power. Well, there you have it, guys. Proof that the relay is working and everything else in the system is working. So we need to go ahead and attack the starter motor. All right, guys, so let me take you over to the passenger side fender well, because in here we can actually get a good look of the starter motor. All right, so hopefully you guys are getting a good view of the starter. So this down here is a starter motor, and this is a starter solenoid. As you can see, this is the main battery cable that's attached to the starter. And if you look up here, you'll see the cable that goes to the starter solenoid. Now what we could try to do while we're here is just take something like this and try to tap the starter body and maybe even the solenoid body to see if we can get the starter to unstick. But I'll tell you right now, guys, I've already tried this and it did not work. So what I want to try to do here is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take the power probe and I'm going to touch the main battery cable here. As you guys can see, we have full battery voltage. Now really what you want to try to do is if you can get somebody to turn the ignition switch to the crank position while you check the voltage here, you want to make sure that you don't have a voltage drop across this cable. Unfortunately, I'm kind of in a situation here where I'm on the side of the road and I don't have anyone here to help me, and I'm actually kind of running out of time here, so I need to make a decision quick. So the next thing I want to do is I want to check the cable that goes to the starter solenoid, and it's going to be this pin right here. And what I want to try to do with this is I want to touch that connection with the power probe, and I'm going to flick this rocker switch and use this power probe to provide a battery power to the solenoid, and I want to see if this solenoid responds. So I'm going to go ahead and try that real quick. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and flick the rocker switch. And you guys can see nothing is happening. So at this point, I'm pretty sure that we need to replace the starter motor. And like I said, guys, I'm here on the side of the road. They're trying to get this thing up and running today, and it's already 4 o'clock in the evening. So I'm going to go ahead and run down to the auto parts store, pick up a starter motor. And while we're at it, we're also going to replace the battery for this thing. Okay, so this isn't a video about how to replace the starter. I'm not going to go through the whole process, but it's pretty straightforward. There's two 13mm bolts here. The starter's going to come down, and there's 2 cable attachments on the back that we need to remove. Sorry, I'm not going to film that. Like I said, that's not what this video is about. And besides, I really want to minimize my time underneath this vehicle because I am on the side of the road, and I do worry about the cars that come flying down the street over here. So like I said, I'm going to go ahead and put the camera down and pull the starter out. All right, guys, so we got our old battery and our old starter out. You guys can see this starter looks like it's seen better days. So let's go ahead and switch these out for new parts. Bam. So we got our replacement parts here. Got our new battery, AC Delco, and an AC Delco starter. So let's go ahead and get these installed. Okay, guys, so we got our replacement starter installed. Like I said, it was pretty simple to do. There's only 2 mounting bolts, and then there's 2 bolts on the backside for the cables. So I'm gonna go ahead and install the battery and see if we can start this thing. All right, guys, so we've got our new battery installed. Now it's time for the moment of truth. Let's go ahead and move inside the vehicle and see if we can start this thing. So I've got the key in my hand. I'm gonna go ahead and stick it into the ignition, and let's see if this thing cranks. Bam, we are back in business. All right, so as you guys can see, the engine is back up and running. It just needed a replacement starter. Again, we did our checks to verify that the starter was our problem. Now I am probably still gonna recommend to the customer that we replace that relay, but I did also tell him that he should probably try to locate a lid for this fuse box because, like I said, you guys can see we got some water intrusion going on there. We don't know if we have any other problems related to that, but we do know that we definitely don't want to have any problems in the future. So it's best to get that taken care of as soon as possible. Anyways, guys, I know this was a quick and easy video, but I figure I'd bring you guys along. Hopefully you guys learned something. If you liked the video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up. If you haven't done so already, make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks.